So with Wand, we had initially started off with looking to overseas development. We're going to raise our pre-seed, standard route, ship it overseas, but the problems that we experienced there were that even if we're going to a labor market that's half that of the United States, it's still immensely expensive, and the language barriers of having to deal with offshore development teams degrade the ability to execute on your project. And when you're trying to convey your idea from an early stage perspective, even if you're still getting a grasp of your idea, it's very, very important to convey those ideas transparently. So that's why we ended up moving on from outsourced. And at the end of the day, it was also boilerplate technology. We'd spend 5 to 6 figures to get a basic tech stack that by the time we move on to our version 2.0, we would have to revamp the entire platform. So that's when we kind of transitioned into thinking about in-house development. We were going to move on, bring on some team members, even learning on our in-house team. Some of the people that we have on the team right now are developers. My background's in development. But at the end of the day, in-house development is time-consuming. If we brought in outside people, it's an early dilution of equity, and it's not a long-term solution, solely because the people that you bring on early stage to develop out our platform aren't always the ones that are going to be iterating through it in the long term. So then we ended up sticking with that option. So we were doing a pitch competition. That was when everything really changed for our platform, and we discovered the safety API and the possibilities that it brought to our ability to execute with Wand. And the biggest benefits there being is that it was scalable from the get-go, it was quick to execute, it was cost-effective to implement into our platform, and it was more powerful than any other tech stack that was on the market that we were considering at the time. And I'll iterate on those reasons. But the direct value add for Wand, high level, is that we went from this, which is concept, to a version 1 in a matter of weeks, which is really incredible when we kind of pivoted back at the end of the day and thought about what we had accomplished. Initially when we were looking to our outsourced teams, and especially in-house development, we were looking at 4 to 6 month development times, and when you're a startup and you're trying to get your product out the door and get that first user traction, it's just not ideal to have to wait that long to get your product to market. We've been on those investor tracks and talked to people, and what's the most important thing? You want to make your first customers happy. But to prove our concept, we have to have that platform to make the customers happy. So that's why it was so powerful for us to be able to execute on that scale thanks to the safety API. So talking about how we're able to accomplish that, we'll cover implementation. I'm not going to dive in too technically here. I'll kind of cover the 2 biggest value adds from a startup perspective on how the safety API can be used to rapidly execute the development of your platform. The first of those being is that adding complex features to a platform from the start is immensely simple with the backend environment that's pre-existing in the safety API. And what that means is that whenever you're iterating through the development of a project, there's kind of 2 approaches. You can either develop out your backend, think of all the objects that are necessary, and then work out the UI from there, or you can do what our approach was, is we developed our entire UI. We knew exactly what our user experience wanted to be. It was very important to us, and then we started plugging in objects from there. Next step being doing your backend development is, and this is actually a quote from Jerry, is that everything is tables and columns, right? You've got an object and everything has fields, and those are the traits of the object. Just for a simple user, you've got your user, and you've got the address and the phone number and the name and the email and all these complex fields, and that's just for one aspect. And you've got scheduling, reviews, and all these items that you have to iterate through from the get-go, whether it's before or after developing your user experience, that is often daunting from a startup perspective because you don't always know what you need to implement. And that was really one of the biggest things that got us out the door so fast with the safety API. And the biggest value add there being is that half of our development work was already done by the time that we had started. And that's 100% authentic. We sat down in saying that we had our UI built out, and we were like, all right, what do we got to plug into the platform? Let's sit down and get going. And we found that we were missing a minute handful of unique objects that were very industry specific to our platform. Those being in-app reviews for our cleaners, and then some scheduling objects that you can actually see implemented in the GIF on screen. But the value add there being calling to what Jerry mentioned yesterday with kind of the Salesforce networking model, and that the product gets more powerful with every company that comes on, is that now that we've implemented those objects into that environment for our platform, those scheduling objects and the review objects, that only took maybe 48 to 72 hours for us to add those into the system, and B, now they're there in the future for any other platform wanting to build off of this API that needs to use those same objects. So that's why it's, from a general perspective, important and very, very valuable to bring on such a diverse portfolio of companies in order to continue making this platform more and more powerful. Because from the get-go, as being one of the guinea pigs, I'm already speaking on how valuable it was for us to be able to execute so fast. But there are so many other niche verticals. I mean, we have a lot of powerful industries in the room, speaking from cybersecurity to federal grants and across the board. But in a more general marketplace perspective, this API and the power that it gives a startup from the get-go is immensely valuable across the board, from up to the federal level, as we've learned over the last 24 hours throughout this conference so far, all the way down to a simple marketplace platform like Wand. That's kind of that first silo. Secondary to that, when it comes to actually using the API as a strong library of requests, and how that can be helpful when after those objects are implemented in the back end, the additional ones we had to add, and calling in the pre-existing ones that we've noted are back there, in and out of the platform. A lot of the times when you work with a third-party API, you've got a small number of endpoints. Like won't dive into it, but a small handful of different URLs where you will create the logic of sending that user information back and calling it into your platform to display what's shown in the user interface. And having to program the logic for sending that data back and forth for a variety of different scenarios across 2 or 3 URLs can be programmatically complex a lot of the time, especially for a startup. And for us, having dozens of unique calls out of the gate helped simplify that process again out the gate. We didn't need to create deletion logic, updating logic, I'll do the drop down there in a second, that GIF, but there's a unique call solely for sending files back and forth, which is, again, the diversity of having these calls. It doesn't get complex because of the number of calls that are there. It's immensely simple because of the logic that you are saving the time to have to implement programmatically from that standpoint. So those are the 2 big value adds of the safety API, and just kind of highlighting again on those 2 benefits, but starting with the one that wasn't directly covered in either of those last 2 slides is security. Out the gate, as a marketplace platform where we hear all these horror stories, nowadays about, Everett can speak to background checks and etc. You're wanting your data to be secure, you're inviting people in your home, trusting them, what's happening to your data if you're trusting a new platform. For us to be able to launch out the gate with HIPAA compliance from a version 1 with no additional programming required, immensely valuable. It was huge. And the reason that this is easy with the safety API is because they implement the same authentication method as OAuth 2.0, but the login methodology is a tiny bit more complex. And as I was even talking about with Mark this morning, once you get over that minute learning curve and you take advantage of the diverse portfolio of API calls and requests that you can work with, it's all 100 miles per hour from there. There's no other, you're over the barrier. So that's one of the biggest value adds, being able to launch out the gate, utilizing the safety API is security. Having that HIPAA compliant level of security out the gate for a marketplace platform, completely unheard of. Most platforms won't add it until iterations down the road, V2, even V3, etc. Reiterating, it's quick to market, that pre-existing backend of all those items, and again, it grows with every new company that uses the API. It cuts the development time in half, if not more, from the get-go. And then scalability. We know how quickly we want to grow, and thanks to having been able to get out the gate with the API, we're on that growth track right now. And the power of that also, kind of calling back to the initial outsourced options, you can pay tens of thousands of dollars to build a solution that the second you kind of get on that growth track, you've got to revamp the entire product because you can't handle the users that are flowing through. But with the safety API, you can grow within the environment that's pre-established and scale up from there. But knowing that the safety API is a newer product, Jerry's been very generous in allowing us to mirror data across AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and a handful of other cloud-based solutions, so that if we ever grow outside of the range of cost effectiveness of the safety environment, it's easy to mirror the data around. And also from a security perspective, if one silo goes down, all of that data is pre-existing across the board. It's very valuable for us to have that level of security out the gate also. Again, talking about how that's been impactful to us. As we mentioned, we got this product, again, we were quoted 4 to 6 months was our initial timeline. We got this thing out the gate 6 to 8 weeks. We've begun getting our initial user traction, and we're on the road heading up now, thanks to the safety API. And yeah, my name is Benjamin Anderson. I'm with One, and that's the high-level overview, so ask me your questions.